Okay. So the children in class are actually getting a sneak preview. So these guys are hearing it before you guys hear it. So I'm very sorry for making you wait so long for the next part of the story. This is called The Ruined City, guys. We're about to find out who the man with the knife is. That's what I needed, thank you. Maybe a cheer? Got a cheer in it?
Yes!
The man was tall. His arms and hands were covered in scars and burns. Old white scars crisscrossed with new red ones. He held the knife at the level of their necks, casually, as if it were just a breadstick. Like the Minotaur, whispered Con. At the man's side, close at his heels, waddled an enormous vulture with a red head and a curved beak. Its head came up higher than the man's knees. That small person in the Dolores trouser suit. The man's nostrils had a high flare to them, and they twitched as he spoke. His voice was deep. His accent, Fred thought, belonged among good tailoring and fast motor cars. What's wrong with him? There was silence, except for Max's sobs. Well, said the man. He twirled the knife in his fingers. The tip of his thumb was missing. He's crying, said Fred. Why, he sounds like a dying screech owl, like a lion blowing on a ship's whistle. Fred's heart was red hot and beating double time. He was surprised that his voice sounded almost so calm. He's 5. That's not a reason. You're pointing a knife at his head, said Lila. That's not a good reason. But he lowered the knife. The man stepped closer into a patch of green sun, and they could see him more clearly now. His dress was exquisite, so he wasn't actually wearing a dress, but the things that he was dressed in were exquisite. But he smelt pungent. What do you think that means? Who would like the smell of this man? No, I don't think any of us would like the smell of this man if he smelled pungent. Don't forget, if he's been there, he's probably been there a while. No soap. No shampoo.
I'll take some. I'll take my mum.
His trousers, Fred saw, were quite ordinary. Green khaki, worn through at the knee and spotlessly clean, but that, along with the white shirt torn off at the elbow and patched with coconut fibre, was the only thing about him that was normal. His shoes were made from what looked like alligator skin, with very thin vines for shoelaces, a jacket sewn neatly from black furs hung over his shoulders. The buttons, wait for this, the buttons were caiman teeth. He wore leather cuffs on each wrist and a signet ring on his little finger. From a distance, he might have been on his way to a country house party. Up close, he looked as though he had reconstructed a prime minister from once living things. Con swallowed, and she spoke in a whisper. Sorry about that, guys. We had a surprise visitor in the classroom. It was not the man from the jungle. It was Mr. Edwards. Con swallowed. She spoke in a whisper. Is it just me, or does he look like the kind of person who won't definitely not kill you? Her eyes were stretched open and her skin was taut over the bones in her face. Fred's entire body had gone rigid, spine and shoulders and knees frozen, but he managed to nod his head half a centimetre. He spoke out of the corner of his mouth. Not just you. The man took another step towards them. His right leg swung slightly out to the side as he moved. Fred noticed for the first time that his right foot was strapped with 3 slim, highly polished pieces of wood. Despite the limp and the scars and the stubble, the animal Fred thought of was a panther, something with strong jaws and sharp manners. Who are you? Said the man. None of the children answered. They looked at each other. Nobody wanted to be the first one to speak. How did you get here? The man said impatiently. Fred tried to take a deep breath. Our plane crashed, he said, and the pilot died, and we followed a map. He put his hands in his pockets, attempting to look nonchalant while trying to find something he could fight with if he needed to. But he could only find a couple of squashed acai berries, which would not be very deadly in a battle. Show me! Fred handed him the scrap of bark, fumbling in his back pocket, his fingers suddenly uncooperative and clumsy. The man glanced at it. Who drew this? Silently, Con raised her hand. Based on what? Con shook her head so that her hair fell in a protective wave across her face. Well, said the man. We found a map in a tree, said Fred, and Con made a copy, and when it got wet, so that's what we did. The man screwed at the bark in his hand. Please, said Lila, don't be angry. All we wanted to do was get home. The man looked down at the vulture as if for inspiration. And what am I supposed to do with you now? Nothing. Just let us stay for a little while. We won't make any noise, begged Lila. That small one will. Max felt the man's gaze fall on him, and then he began to cry again. She'll make some crying noises. The man let out a sound that was somewhere between a sigh and a growl. Do you want to give that one a go? That's pretty accurate, well done. Lila picked Max up. Sorry, her voice wavered, and Bacca caught the fear from her skin and let out a meow like a cat. He's only 5, she whispered. You all keep saying that, as if it's an explanation. Should I like him simply because he's small? I do not like undercooked food. Children are just undercooked adults. Con's lip began to quiver, and Fred looked at her, surprised, but he moved his shoe half an inch so that their feet touched. The man looked at them, ranged in a line from the front of him, shaking with nerves and an expectation. He sighed. Are you thirsty? He asked. Yes, said Fred. Very, said Lila. Very, very, said Max. He sniffed tearfully and wiped a great wedge of snot on his wrist. Wait here. And then he glared at Max. Don't touch the vulture. It bites. He bites when it's anxious, and it takes very little to make him anxious. Vultures have nervous souls. The man strode across the great stone courtyard. He stopped at a tree trunk, a stump of wood as wide as a well, and lifted a slab of stone off its top. Fred shielded his eyes and stared. The tree trunk had been hollowed out and was full of water. The man dipped a large green bowl into the water and stomped back over to them. Here! He thrust the bowl at Fred. The ring on the man's finger wasn't gold. Fred saw it was made out of bone, coated in flakes of iridescent snake scales. Fred looked at the bowl in his hands. It was made from an explorer's pith helmet, the brim of the hat bent into a lip. Fred sniffed it. The man raised his eyebrows. I can assure you it's perfectly clean, he said. Fred took a gulp. Thankfully, it didn't taste of hair, only a little of wood, birds, and the rainforest. He drank deeply and passed it to Lila, who handed it to Max, who then dunked his whole head in the hat. The man waited until all 4 had drunk, and then he took back the bowl and offered it to the vulture. As the vulture drank, the man rested his hand on the bird's head, and stroked its wattle between his thumb. His face was tense. What is it that you want? He asked the children. The children looked at each other. We want you to help us get home, said Lila. She spoke very quietly. So quietly he had to bend down to hear. Why should I? I can't look after Max much longer. He has allergies and nightmares, and I don't know what I can dress him with if he keeps ripping holes in his clothes. Please help us. As she spoke, the vulture waddled away from the man's side and headed straight for Max, who was hiccuping and sniffing. A line of snot dripped from his nose onto his ankle. We're going to stop there, guys. So, shout goodbye to everyone.
Bye.
And you will have to find out what happens with the man and the vulture tomorrow, so we will see you then. Goodbye.